Welcome, history fans, to a journey into the dark, brutal, ancient world of the Olympic Games. Today, the Games mean global peace, unity, and joyful tears on the shining metal podium. But if you travel back to ancient Greece, you will be shocked by the dark and drastic reality. These ancient events were not peaceful sports, but brutal blood offerings to the mighty thunder god, Zeus. The first shocking rule will make you blush. All athletes had to compete entirely naked in the dirt. Forget modern stadiums. We take you back to the sacred, dusty grounds of ancient Olympia. Under the scorching Mediterranean sun, there was no prize money and absolutely no bronze medals. It was a ruthless arena, where men sought either immortal glory or devastating public shame. The Games were tied to religion, a spectacular festival held to honor the king of the gods. A towering statue of Zeus, made from gold and ivory, silently watched over every single match. To please him, athletes had to strip away all earthly possessions, including the clothes on their backs. Walking entirely naked into the arena was considered the highest form of physical purity. Before stepping onto the track, they rubbed their entire bodies with a thick coat of pure olive oil. This golden liquid made their muscles gleam under the sun, turning them into living, breathing sculptures. But the oil attracted dry, suffocating dust, creating a gritty crust over their sweating skin. Imagine running at full speed while covered in a heavy layer of sticky mud and burning sand. There was no shade, no water breaks, and absolutely no mercy from the punishing afternoon heat. To the Greeks, this extreme suffering was the only way to separate mortal men from the divine gods. Every drop of sweat that fell onto the earth was seen as a sacred offering to the heavens. Even the spectators had to endure the brutal conditions, standing shoulder to shoulder on grassy hills. Tens of thousands of men gathered in the scorching valley, screaming and roaring like a wild, hungry beast. Women were strictly forbidden from watching, and breaking the sacred law meant an instant, tragic fate. Priests walked through the massive crowds, burning incense to mask the overwhelming smell of sweat and fear. In this savage environment, the human body was both a beautiful weapon and a vulnerable target. Competitors were not just athletes. Many of them were hardened soldiers, returning from bloody wars. They brought the ruthless mindset of the battlefield directly onto the pristine sands of the stadium. For these ancient warriors, losing a match was far worse than receiving a fatal wound in combat. Returning home without the victory crown meant facing eternal mockery from their family and peers. Under intense pressure, many fighters secretly prayed to the gods for victory or a glorious end. The judges, known as Hellenodikai, watched every single move with cold and unforgiving eyes. Dressed in rich purple robes, they held long, flexible vine whips to punish anyone who broke the rules. A false start in a running race would result in severe public lashings right there on the dusty track. Pain was an accepted part of the spectacle, designed to test the limits of human endurance. If you think running entirely naked is extreme, the ancient Greeks had an even heavier challenge. As the Games progressed, events transformed from simple athletic feats into terrifying survival tests. The crowd's roar grew louder as they anticipated the arrival of the heavily armored sprinters. The pure and absolute strength of the human body was about to be pushed beyond its breaking point. and the golden statue of Zeus seemed to look down with a demanding, cold, and stony glare. It is time to leave the naked runners behind and enter the brutal domain of ancient combat sports. Prepare yourself, for the next events will show you the true, terrifying meaning of ancient glory. Welcome to the Hoplitodromos, a grueling race where athletes traded nakedness for heavy bronze armor. Competitors sprinted at maximum speed while wearing a Corinthian helmet and carrying a massive shield. This heavy gear weighed up to 25 kilograms, instantly turning a simple run into pure torture. The heavy bronze shield, the aspis, severely unbalanced the runners, forcing an awkward and painful stride. Leg muscles cramped and burned as they pounded the compacted sand under the suffocating weight of metal. The tight helmets restricted their breathing, trapping the scorching heat and blinding sweat against their faces. Many collapsed from sheer heat exhaustion before reaching the finish line, their bodies completely broken. This exhausting event was not just a game. It was direct preparation for the brutal reality of war. But if you thought the armored sprint was dangerous, the Hippodrome held horrors that were far more deadly. Welcome to chariot racing, the most prestigious, expensive, and devastating sport of the ancient era. Here, wealthy kings and tyrants sponsored teams, but the brave drivers were the ones who truly risked their lives. Up to 40 massive chariots would line up on the dusty track, pulled by powerful, wild-eyed war horses. The air vibrated with the deafening roar of the crowd and the terrifying thundering of massive hooves. These wooden chariots were incredibly light and fragile, designed entirely for maximum, absolute speed. There were no safety rails, no protective gear, and absolutely no brakes to stop these rushing death traps. Drivers wore only a simple white tunic, holding nothing but a long wooden whip and thick leather reins. The most dangerous part of the race was the turning post, a sharp, narrow corner known as the Taraxipos. This name translates directly to the horse terrifier, and it was the site of countless devastating crashes. As dozens of chariots converged at top speed into this tight corner, devastating collisions were certain. Wheels interlocked and splintered into sharp shrapnel, sending men and horses violently crashing into the dirt. When a chariot flipped over, the driver's worst nightmare instantly became a terrifying truth. To maintain absolute control, drivers firmly tied the thick leather reins directly around their own waists. This meant that when a crash occurred, they could not easily let go, trapping them with the panicked horses. Helpless drivers were mercilessly dragged across the rough, sandy track by 1,000-pound beasts in blind terror. Bones shattered, bodies were broken under heavy hooves, and crimson essence painted the entire racing arena. In one famous historical race, 40 chariots started, but only a single driver survived the finish. Yet the surviving driver did not receive the highest glory. The true victor was the wealthy horse owner. The man who bled on the track was just a disposable tool in the brutal quest for divine favor. The crowd watched this carnage with utter fascination, cheering as the sand soaked up the fresh crimson stains. To them, fatal accidents were not tragedies. They were the unpredictable and thrilling will of the gods. If Zeus favored you, you survived the lethal curves. If he did not, your crushed body was dragged from the dirt. This spectacle cemented chariot racing as the ultimate display of immense wealth and cruel fate. While chariot races relied on horses and gear, the final horror of the games relied purely on bare hands. As the sun lowered, casting long shadows, the ultimate test of human savagery was prepared to finally begin. We now leave the deafening racing track for a much smaller, far more intimate circle of pure violence. This event is so brutally extreme, it makes modern mixed martial arts look like a gentle playground game. There are no weapons, no heavy armor, and no running away. There is only raw flesh, bone, and boiling blood. If you were forced into this arena, would you choose the heavy armor or the incredibly fragile chariot? Think carefully about your survival. For an ancient Olympia, one wrong choice meant a total and instant ruin. Let us descend into the fighting pit, where the most terrifying fighters in history are waiting for you. Welcome to the brutal and ruthless world of Pankration, the most violent sport in history. This ancient event was a terrifying mix of bare-knuckle boxing and totally free wrestling. Fighters wore no protective gloves, there were no weight classes, and no time limits at all. The rules were incredibly simple, with only two major actions strictly banned in the dirt. Competitors were not allowed to bite their rivals or gouge their unprotected eyes out. However, outside of those two rules, absolutely everything else was completely legal. Breaking a man's fingers, violently kicking his groin, or choking him were common tactics. The combatants would wrestle violently in the mud, twisting limbs until they snapped loudly. Imagine the horrifying sound of crushing joints, mixing with the desperate screams of men. Referees stood close by, but they often ignored brutal fouls if the fight was entertaining. Their only tool of control was a long, heavy whip, ready to lash out at severe rule breakers. To submit, a defeated fighter had to simply raise a single index finger to the sky. In the chaotic heat of a deadly chokehold, raising a finger was nearly impossible. Many brave warriors refused to surrender, choosing to embrace a glorious and tragic end. If a fighter fell during the brutal match, the judges would crown his lifeless form the winner. His opponent would be permanently banned, cast out in shame for ending a sacred life. One famous champion, named Heroism, defended his title while facing a tragic end. With his last ounce of strength, he violently twisted and broke his rival's heavy ankle. Extreme pain forced his opponent to submit, just as Heroism drew his very final breath. The crowd erupted in massive cheers, honoring the fallen man as a supreme ancient hero. The judges carefully placed the victory wreath upon his cold, lifeless, battered forehead. This level of pure fanaticism demonstrates how the Greeks viewed pain and physical glory. There was absolutely no room for mercy, compassion, or weakness in this dusty pit. The fighters were not just trying to win a game. They fought to become living legends. Every drop of blood spilled on the ground was a testament to their unwavering spirit. They fought with a savage intensity that modern athletes can barely even comprehend. Their massive muscles strained, their bones cracked loudly, and their lungs burned for eternal fame. This horrific violence was never hidden away. It was celebrated under the bright sun. The stadium's roar grew deafening whenever a fighter delivered a truly crippling blow. Even the most brutal injuries were considered glorious marks of total bravery. A broken nose or a shattered limb was a permanent badge of supreme athletic honor. Men willingly embraced this immense torture, hoping to catch the eye of the high gods. The sheer brutality of Pankration pushed the very limits of human body strength. It was a pure Darwinian struggle, where only the strongest and most merciless could survive. In the end, when the blood dried and the dust settled, only a single champion remained. Could you have survived the absolute madness of this incredibly terrifying sport? Think about the unimaginable pain these men endured to wear a simple crown of leaves. After surviving this hellish nightmare, the winner was finally ready for his grand prize. The violence fades away, replaced by a profound, awe-inspiring sense of deep reverence. We now move to the final moments of the ancient games, where mortal men become living gods. Standing bruised, battered, and completely exhausted on the sunlit steps of the Grand Temple, the champion is presented with the kotinos, a simple crown made of fresh olive leaves. There is no heavy gold medal hanging from his neck, and no massive financial reward. To the modern eye, this frail, leafy branch might seem like a very disappointing prize. But in the ancient Hellenic world, this simple crown held far more power than pure gold. It meant that the brutal fighter had been directly chosen by the almighty thunder god Zeus. He was no longer a mere mortal man. He had finally become a glorious demigod. When the victor returned to his home city, the grand celebrations were deeply spectacular. Parts of the city's massive defensive walls were fully torn down to welcome him inside. The powerful symbolism was clear. A city with such a great hero needs no stone walls. He would be completely exempt from paying any taxes for the rest of his entire life. Free meals at the finest public banquets were strictly guaranteed until his dying breath. In many cases, stunning life-sized marble statues were carved to immortalize his physique. These ancient champions became highly revered political figures and brave commanders. Their legendary sweat and blood were considered magical relics that could bless the whole town. In the deeply philosophical minds of the ancient Greeks, sports were simply a form of war. To survive the merciless violence of the arena was to conquer human weakness and fear. It was the absolute proof that the brave fighter possessed a magnificent divine spirit. So, when you look at the modern Olympic Games, with their peaceful handshakes and soft rubber tracks, remember the dark and terrifying origins buried deep beneath the ancient sandy stadium. Remember the brave naked runners who collapsed from severe heat exhaustion under the hot sky. Remember the desperate chariot drivers who were violently dragged to their tragic, fatal ends. Never forget the brutal Pankration fighters who chose a grim fate over a shameful surrender. They were not participating in some friendly international athletic exhibition. They were sacrificing their own bodies to achieve an immortal, stunning glimpse of the divine. History often polishes the rough past, leaving us with incredibly comfortable myths. But the ancient Olympics were a stunning testament to human pain and pure, primal violence. To survive this arena was to earn the gods' favor. But was this violence truly heroic? Or was it just a senseless carnage disguised as a holy tradition? Share your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this dark history, Please like, share, and subscribe for more epic ancient tales.